Welcome to the Barrow Bookstore Audio Series. From the Journal of Henry David Thoreau, May 31st, 1850. Setting Fire to the Concord Woods. I once set fire to the woods. Having set out one April day to go to the sources of Concord River in a boat with a single companion, meaning to camp on the bank at night or seek a lodging in some neighboring country inn or farmhouse, we took fishing tackle with us that we might fitly procure our food from the stream, Indian-like. At the shoemaker's near the river we obtained a match, which we had forgotten. Though it was thus early in the spring, the river was low, for there had not been much rain, and we succeeded in catching a mess of fish sufficient for our dinner before we had left the town, and by the shores of Fairhaven Pond we proceeded to cook them. The earth was uncommonly dry, and our fire, kindled far from the woods in a sunny recess in the hillside on the east of the pond, suddenly caught the dry grass of the previous year, which grew about the stump on which it was kindled. We sprang to extinguish it, at first with our hands and feet, and then we fought it with a board obtained from the boat, but in a few minutes it was beyond our reach. Being on the side of a hill, it spread rapidly upward, through the long, dry, wiry grass, interspersed with bushes. "Well, where will this end?" asked my companion. I saw that it might be bounded by Well Meadow Brook on one side, but would, perchance, go to the village side of the brook. "It will go to town," I answered. While my companion took the boat back down the river, I set out through the woods to inform the owners and to raise the town. The fire had already spread a dozen rods on every side, and went leaping and crackling wildly and irreclaimably toward the wood. That way went the flames with wild delight, and we felt that we had no control over the demonic creature to which we had given birth. We had kindled many fires in the woods before, burning a clear space in the grass, without ever kindling such a fire as this. As I ran toward the town through the woods, I could see the smoke over the woods behind me, marking the spot and the progress of the flames. The first farmer whom I met driving a team after leaving the woods inquired the cause of the smoke. I told him. "Well," said he, "it's none of my stuff," and drove along. The next I met was the owner in his field, with whom I returned at once to the woods, running all the way. I had already run 2 miles. When at length we got into the neighborhood of the flames, we met a carpenter who had been hewing timber, an infirm man who had been driven off by the fire, fleeing with his axe. The farmer returned to hasten more assistance. I, who was spent with running, remained. What could I do alone against a front of flame 1/2 a mile wide? I walked slowly through the wood to Fairhaven Cliff, climbed to the highest rock, and sat down upon it to observe the progress of the flames, which were rapidly approaching me, now about a mile distant from the spot where the fire was kindled. Presently I heard the sound of the distant bell giving the alarm, and I knew that the town was on its way to the scene. Hitherto I had felt like a guilty person, nothing but shame and regret. But now I settled the matter with myself shortly. I said to myself, who are these men who are said to be the owners of these woods, and how am I related to them? I have set fire to the forest, but I have done no wrong therein, and now it is as if the lightning had done it. These flames are but consuming their natural food. It has never troubled me from that day to this more than if the lightning had done it. The trivial fishing was all that disturbed me, and disturbs me still. So shortly I settled it with myself, and stood to watch the approaching flames. It was a glorious spectacle, and I was the only one there to enjoy it. The fire now reached the base of the cliff, and then rushed up its sides. The squirrels ran before it in blind haste, and 3 pigeons dashed into the midst of the smoke. The flames flashed up to the pines to their tops, as if they were powder. When I found I was about to be surrounded by the fire, I retreated and joined the forces now arriving from the town. It took us several hours to surround the flames with our hoes and shovels, and by backfires subdue them. In the midst of all, I saw the farmer whom I first met, who had turned indifferently away, saying it was none of his stuff, striving earnestly to save his corded wood, his stuff, which the fire had already seized, and which it after all consumed. It burned over 100 acres or more, and destroyed much young wood. When I returned home late in the day with others of my townsmen, I could not help noticing that the crowd, who were so ready to condemn the individual who had kindled the fire, did not sympathize with the owners of the wood, but were in fact highly elated, and as it were thankful for the opportunity which had afforded them so much sport. And it was only 6 owners, so-called, though not all of them, who looked sour or grieved, and I felt that I had a deeper interest in the woods, knew them better, and should feel their loss more than any or all of them. The farmer, whom I had first conducted to the woods, was obliged to ask me the shortest way back through his own lot. Why, then, should the 6 owners and the individuals who set the fire alone feel sorrow for the loss of the wood, while the rest of the town have their spirits raised? Some of the owners, however, bore their loss like men, but other some declared behind my back that I was a damned rascal, and a flibberty-gibbet or two who crowed like the old cock shouted some reminiscences of burnt woods from safe recesses for some years after. I have had nothing to say to any of them. The locomotive engine has since burned over nearly all the same ground and more, and in some measure blotted out the memory of the previous fire. For a long time after I had learned this lesson, I marveled that while matches and tinder were contemporaries, the world was not consumed. Why the houses that have hearths were not burned before another day, if the flames were not as hungry now as when I waked them. I at once ceased to regard the owners and my own fault, if fault there was any in the matter, and attended to the phenomenon before me, determined to make the most of it. To be sure, I felt a little ashamed when I reflected on what trivial occasion this had happened, that at the time I was no better employed than my townsmen. That night I watched the fire, where some stumps still flamed at midnight in the midst of the blackened waste, wandering through the woods by myself, and far in the night I threaded my way to the spot where the fire had taken, and discovered the now broiled fish, which had been dressed, scattered over the burnt grass. This has been a reading of Setting Fire to the Concord Woods by Henry David Thoreau, presented by the Barrow Bookstore, located in historic Concord, Massachusetts, home of the authors. Reading and music by Jamie Lee. Thank you for listening. Join us next week for a reading of Nathaniel Hawthorne's Mrs. Bullfrog.